Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International Water Resources Association World Water Day webinar. We are really excited to have you with us here today. We have a great panel set up for you. A lot of practitioners, people who have a lot of experience with this year's theme, and we will be starting our webinar in just 1 or 2 minutes. So if you have a last-minute cup of coffee you need to grab, or a cup of water or whatever, go ahead and take care of that, and we'll be started in just 1 minute. Really appreciate you coming and joining us today. All right, it's 2 minutes after 3 o'clock here in Europe, and so I think it's a good time as any to get started on our webinar. Like I said, this is the International Water Resources Association webinar for World Water Day. We're celebrating this year's theme of leaving no one behind. So to do that, we've brought together a really diverse and talented panel of speakers that are both covering practitioner side stuff, people who've been active in NGOs, but also people who have academic backgrounds as well. So I know a lot of you come from both those kind of fields, so this will be really good, and hopefully we'll give you a really good idea of some of the major themes and issues that are kind of underline this year's World Water Day topic. So our panelists include Shivan Hashimidi, who's a postdoctorate at Seoul National University, Alejandro Jimenez, who's a program director for water governance in the Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI. Amanda Lofton, the Director General of WaterLex, Alexander Ott, Program Specialist at UNESCO, and Lisha Whitmere, who is with the Women for Water Partnership. So everyone knows that this is the webinar hosted by the International Water Resources Association. The IWRA is an international network of researchers and practitioners who work on a multidisciplinary range of water resource issues. We are a nonprofit, non-governmental educational organization, and we provide a global knowledge-based forum for bridging disciplines and geographies by connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, and institutions, everyone who's concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resources. So we are really happy to have you here with us today. We have, like I said, a great panel. I'm really excited. We've been bringing these guys together and working and talking about things for quite a while now. So, you know, this year's theme, you know, World Water Day of leaving no one behind, really touches on a lot of groups who might be otherwise neglected or overlooked. So groups like women, children, refugees, indigenous groups, disabled people who maybe not have access to world water resources in the same way that, in an equitable way with the rest of their communities and the rest of the world. Many of these themes have been addressed through questions like the Sustainable 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which says that everyone needs to benefit from having access to water, and this also underlines issues like the human right to water. However, many people have been left behind, and so this is an opportunity for us to reflect on them, to look at strategies and ideas about how to address groups that have been left behind, and look at programs and ways that that's being addressed right now. So, you know, we'd like to start the conversation here in our webinar, but we're going to continue it through our LinkedIn webpage. So after the event, if you have a lot of interest in continue to discuss and engage on these issues, please go to our LinkedIn webpage, and we'll have some topics up there, some questions for you to think about, and please respond and engage with us there. And make sure to follow and like our LinkedIn webpage as well. I know a lot of you have probably come to some of our webinars before, but just to cover the format, just to remind you, what we're going to do is have each of our panelists give a short presentation with a webinar, with PowerPoint. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions. So you can see on your GoToWebinar control panel there on your screen, the questions are about halfway down. So if you go all the way down, there's a lot of little sections, questions. You type that and it'll come right to us. And I'll go ahead and ask your question to our panel at the end of all the presentations. And please, if you have a particular question about a slide or something that you hear here from one of our panelists, go ahead and feel free to reach out to them directly. If you have a question about a statistics or something that you hear, just go ahead and reach out to them and look them up. A lot of them are on Twitter. A lot of them have email addresses that you can find. And don't feel like that you have to only ask your question here. So I think that kind of covers the ground rules, and that kind of covers what we're going to do today. So we really appreciate you being here with us, and we are going to go directly to our first presenter. Shivan, are you ready?
Yes.
Excellent.
Hello, everybody.
Have you start.
Okay. All right. Distinguished colleagues.
Make sure you share your screen there with us, Shivan.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
There you go. And get that present. There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. So can you see my screen well? Is it fine? All right. So distinguished colleagues and dear audiences, thank you very much for being here, and it's my great pleasure to be here and present this work for you. My name is Shervin Hashemi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher working at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Seoul National University in beautiful Republic of Korea. So in this presentation, I'm going to introduce you the self-sustaining resource circulated sanitation, which is supposed to be a nature-based sanitation solution toward leaving no one behind. The basic question here is that if our sanitation, so we have to think about our sanitation. Is it NBS, is it LNOB or not? So first of all, let's take a look at the situation of the water and sanitation scarcity in the world. So this map shows the world access to the drinking water. This one shows the world access to the sanitation services, and this one shows the access to the hand washing facilities. There is something common in all these maps. Do you know what? All these cases are focusing on something. There is a specific places in the world that are facing all these problems. So these parts of the world are actually the places that are left behind. So who is left behind? Sub-Saharan Africa is left behind, Southeast Asia is left behind, and we have several problems in the remote and rural areas. We have problems for the indigenous people, we have problems for women and children, and we have problems for the refugees and disabled. So what is the solutions? Actually, we have guidelines for solutions. So from the year 2000 up to 2015, we were dealing with the Millennium Development Goals. The seventh goal was aiming to provide sustainable sanitation and solve these types of problems. After 2015, we had the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Here, SDG 6 is trying to provide guidelines as for the solutions. And based on the SDG 6, so far the UN Water were proposing like different aims. For example, for 2018, the aim was finding nature-based solutions for water, and this year is focusing on leaving no one behind. So first of all, we need to think about the definition. So what is the definition of the nature-based solution? A nature-based solution is a solution that refers to the sustainable management and use of nature for tackling the environmental challenges. These solutions should sustainably provide environmental, social, and economic benefits. So the elements, elements are like this. So the elements, or principles are like this. The solutions should be sustainable. There should be no energy consumption, no harmful residues, and no social conflicts. On the other hand, we have principles for leaving no one behind. In these cases, we should consider the technical principles, but we have to also think outside of the box. Technical parts are not everything. We have to also consider the social principles and economic principles. As for the technical principles, we can think about like making the no or minimum water and energy consumption. I'm actually focusing on the sanitation parts. We have to think about a kind of uncentralized system. We have to think about the self-sustainability and easy maintenance. We have to think about utilization so that we can remove all those residues. And all these things will become meaningful when these things are practically proven and they are scalable. As for the social principles, so we should consider acceptabilities, we should consider the availability and accessibility. For the economic principles, we have to think about the affordability of the community, and we should think about the economic, if the system is economically beneficial or not. When we have all these items all with each other, then we can think, then we can consider that our solution or our system can match the motto of water for all. All right. So let's see if our current systems can match with all these things or not. So let's think about the centralized sanitation system as solutions. What do we have in these types of systems? These types of systems have specific challenges. In these systems, water, feces, and urine are getting mixed and they are flashed to the septic tank or are being sent to the wastewater treatment plants. So we have high water and energy consumption, we have complicated infrastructures, we have lack of social responsibility, and we have the lack of sufficient treatments. So as we can see, this type of approach and these systems matches neither as to be NBS nor as LNOB. However, we can find some roadmaps. These problems are new and belong to this modern world. So we can think about how the people who were living before us were used to manage that. In this case, indigenous wisdom can come and help us. Specifically in Asia, we have this type of like ancient wisdom that they knew that like urine and feces can be separately collected and be used as fertilizer. So we have this wisdom here, and in the modern world, we can mix that with science and engineering in order to find a solution for that. This solution is something that I should call it self-sustaining resource circulated sanitation. And the philosophy is that we have to change it from waste to resource. So we are going to make a new paradigm of sanitation, which is not waste-oriented sanitation, but it is resource-oriented sanitation. All right. So what are the concepts of these type of systems? In this case, we are going toward the separation, source separation. Feces and urine are getting collected and treated separately in order to be used and utilized as fertilizer or soil conditioner. In this type of systems, so this type of system is actually independent from any water or energy resources from outside. And we can think about source separation and a safe on-site treatment. Can think about the self-sustainability and utilizing these nutrients. We can think about providing economic and social benefits. We can think about some like not using any artificial chemicals or not using any weird additives, and we can think about no or limited residues. So this is an example of this system of the SSRCS that we care about this. So in this type of design, we can see that this type of system is self-sustainable. We have no water, sewer, or energy infrastructure are needed to be used in this type of systems. And this system can be used anywhere because it doesn't have any complicated infrastructure. We can use it in sub-Saharan Africa or southeast of Asia. This system is safe, sustainable, and the treatment is being done by some controlled nitrification process that can be done on urine and feces. And there are other benefits. We can consider this system as a human right-based approach. We can consider the system to be able to be used in the remote areas, which can be safe for women and children. We can think about the possibility of utilizing the final materials as fertilizer or soil conditioner, and this type of system can harvest rainwater and energy from nature. Right? So we have checked this type of system in the fields. So far in Seoul City, we had two different sites. One was the Noban, and another one was in Mapo district. In Noban, actually, the venue was an urban agricultural center. So this system could provide the materials that could be used directly for the agronomic purposes. And also the landowner was a private sector. In the Mapo system, actually, the system was installed in a public park, and people were ordinary people, and the owner was a Seoul municipality. Anyway, we have different places, and all these two places are actually located. Let me say like this: although they are shown inside Seoul City, but actually their location are totally like at like suburban areas. The case of Nowongu, it was like totally like isolated from the city. The case of Mapugu is actually it placed inside an isolated park. So the problem in those parks was that the pipes were used to get rust during winter, and therefore that was a good place for us to test our system there. Anyway, toward these types of field studies, actually, we could make some economic sustainability of our system. We could test the economy of our system. So this diagram is actually showing a conventional on-site sanitation system can be just like, the septic tank system. As we can see, we cannot get much benefits from this system. Year by year, we have to pay for the system, and the cumulative cost is getting toward near like $7,000 after 20 years. However, in our system, in the SSRCS, although we need to pay more, the capital, amount of money is higher than the conventional system. However, because this system can provide benefits by making fertilizer, or it can even increase the productivity of the soil so that people can sell their own agronomic products. So we have benefits here, and the capital cost can get back after about 7 to 10 years. And after that, we will have just pure benefits out of this system. Also, for the case of social sustainabilities, actually, these types of systems are needed to be well maintained. Maintenance are very important in these matters. So we are going toward a kind of like community-based maintenance system. In these cases, we may assign some like management committee. These committee are from the educated local people. So it's obvious that when we are providing these types of systems, we have to first educate people. We have to first teach people about the benefits of these systems, and after that, from this educated local people, we can select people to be the management committee of this. The role of the management committee has been shown in this diagram. They have to operate the system. They have to take care of the treatment. They have to obtain the economic benefits, and they have to take care of the coverage of the maintenance cost. And with the money that they can earn from these benefits, they can do the maintenance. And this circle should go round and round. So as we can see, we can even think about that we can provide like new jobs for the people. We can make job opportunities for the society. So also these people can learn about the system, and they can teach to to other users or other people. Toward this type of strategy, I think that we can approve the social sustainability of our system. There are several other benefits of the SSRCS. Well, there are benefits for the human, right? Because this system can like prevent the widespread death and disease. This type of system can prevent the social crimes, and there will be no gender like disparities for using this system. Also, for the UN organization, investors and donors, we have a lot of benefits. So this is actually provision of a new paradigm for the sustainable sanitation. And also the important part is that this can provide economic benefits. Therefore, the capital cost can and the maintenance cost can be covered by the benefits that we can earn from these systems. And okay, yeah. So we had some innovation achievements from this matter. Actually, we have proposed the basics of these systems in the World Water Challenge 2017, and we have proposed our system to be able to be considered as a solution for the sanitation problems in the Kingdom of Bhutan. And we have got this excellent award from this system. Actually, this award is totally like memorable for me personally, because in that event I have got to know IWRA through my friend Ignacio Dirigibus. Mr. Dirigibus has showed me the benefits of IWRA, and through the IWRA I have found I have got familiar with other organizations like Waterlex, and therefore in 2019 we have proposed our system in the first World Summit on Leaving No One Behind, and I'm very honored to inform you that this system have won the Leaving No One Behind Innovation Award 2019. Back in Korea, this award has been covered by the TVs actually, so you can see that this award was shown on the SBS, stands for Seoul Broadcasting Systems, which is a very like famous broadcasting system here in Korea. And I wish to use this chance to say that although like my name are appearing in all these awards, this was totally a teamwork. So I wish to deliver my warmest gratitudes to the leader of our team, Professor Mu Young Han. And I wish to say that like we are so toward the credits of these awards, we are going to like replicate this system in Vietnam, in a school in Vietnam, and it's toward our team to be able to lead this project and make it real. And so please let me conclude my presentations with some take-home messages. So as we can see, Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast of Asia are the specific places that are left behind in provision of sustainable sanitation. And sustainable solutions that should be provided for these types of areas should be nature-based, and at the same time should be ensured that no one will be left behind. So although the year 2018 are past, we should not forget the NBS. We have to continue our nature-based solutions, and we have to make more efforts to make those solutions to be in the way that no one will be left behind. So in this case, we have developed our resource circulating sanitation system, which is a science-based and practically proven and culturally acceptable system. The system is self-sustaining and can be used in any places, and we don't need any water, sewer, or energy infrastructure. It can even provide economic and social benefits. And I think that by having more practices of these types of systems, by replicating these types of systems, I hope that in the future we can have a good contribution toward SDG 6.2. So this is my final slide. I believe that toward the self-sustaining resource circulated sanitation, we can think about leaving no one behind in overcoming the sanitation challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much for that great presentation. I thought that was a really interesting insight into something that maybe a lot of people haven't really thought about, a different take on what a lot of people probably already have some background on sanitation, but this is a new idea that maybe some people haven't been exposed to. I think is an important way to kind of think about how to expand sanitation access to everyone in an
Exactly. Yes.
equitable way.
Exactly.
We'll go on to our next presenter, Alejandro Jimenez from Siwi. Just give me 1 second and I will make you the presenter.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Very good. Oh, that looks nice.
Thank you, and happy work to you. I'm Alejandro Jimenez, Program Director for Content Development in Water Governance here at the Stockholm International Water Institute. And I wanted to talk about the different aspect of the leaving no one behind perspective, which speaks about meaningful participation, and particularly about a few challenges that indigenous peoples face in this regard. So just very briefly, to name that indigenous people are estimated to be 5% of the global population, but 15% of the population living in poverty, meaning that they are overrepresented in the people that live in poverty. They have weak participation and representation in the politics and decision making, and they are facing barriers to education, language, and cultural use. This reflects in typically in cities lagging behind in terms of access to services and fulfillment, enjoyment of rights. And when it comes to water, access figures show that very clearly when they are available, right? And one of the important things is that it's difficult to find systematic information about this matter. And as the previous special rapporteur on the human right to water and sanitation used to say, indigenous people suffer disproportionate violation of the human right to water and sanitation, like with many other rights, unfortunately. Just a slide that shows where, in the case of Latin America and Caribbean, the gap in access. This is data from the World Bank a couple of years ago, showing a gap for sanitation regionally. That did have information of 26%, and on water, pipe water, of 20%. And it's important to understand as well that indigenous peoples typically have a very specific relationship with water. They hold close spiritual and cultural relationship with it, as well as with the land. Of course, they have been living for generations in a lifestyle that is quite depending and close to natural resources and ecosystems. So they hold extensive knowledge of ecosystems and environmental conditions. And many of indigenous peoples currently live in remote places with high biodiversity, which are also the last unexplored parts of land where now mineral extraction, natural resources exploitation is taking place or wants to take place, which then bring us to a potential conflictive situation. Talking slightly about human rights, I'm sure Amanda will talk more about this later on. I wanted to mention that in the human rights have some principles common to all of them. And here I would like to highlight the non-discrimination, of course, but also transparency, participation, and accountability as aspects that should be part of the application of every human right. And that includes as well, particularly in the aspect of water sustainability, as not compromising the possibility of the future generations to enjoy the human rights that we are enjoying today. So, taking a greater focus on participation, Why participation today? Because it's one of the means to reduce discrimination. Participation can serve different objectives and achieve very important outcomes, from the legitimacy of the process, of course, increased awareness to the population and the stakeholders about the different processes that are taking place, the empowerment of the participants, but of course, better management and improved sustainability of the solutions that are taken. But of course, these outcomes are not just for granted. This means that the participatory processes need to take into consideration several factors to be successful. And in this slide, you see the result of research we have been doing for a couple of years, looking at how participatory process had been undertaken in water and sanitation, and what are aspects that we have to take into consideration for a successful participatory process. First is that we sit in a certain context. So of course, it's not the same Sweden than Spain, China, or Kenya. That is quite obvious. But we have to take that into consideration how we design the participatory process. And there are procedural factors that we should take much care of if we want participatory process to be successful. From the mobilization and awareness raising of the potential participants, of the affected, participation, of course, needs to be free and safe. You can't be threatened because of your participation, or it can be at a cost that people might not be able to afford. Of course, everyone affected should be invited to the table, and those that are representing someone else should, of course, should be legitimate representatives. They accept the use of local knowledge, local languages when needed. Access to information, of course, is necessary so that the stakeholders can come informed to the participatory process. It is essential as well to come into the participatory process with some degree of flexibility, and that the inputs from the participatory process would be able to influence the outcome of the proposed activity. Of course, we have to be responsive and accountable to what are the initial intentions and the outcomes of the participatory process. And this participatory process needs to be, of course, well researched. So there have to be enough also, not only financial resources, but also technical and human resources with the right capacities to conduct those participatory process, and of course have some degree of trust between the different stakeholders that sit on the table, or otherwise the participatory process will not yield any result. So these aspects we think are essential. We have seen through literature as well as interviews and a couple of workshops how these things need to take place in water and sanitation management. And of course, this has a specific implication for the indigenous peoples, because some of the aspects that I was mentioning are, of course, more difficult with different culture, different values, different language, a high imbalance or big imbalance in power, and obviously always, I mean, not always, but in occasions happens that we come to a consultation participatory process not with that flexibility, that opportunity to change what has been proposed. And we also, that is a few years back, took a specific look at the access to water and sanitation services, and we came to see that indigenous peoples, in this case, through direct interviews and visits to communities in different countries were highlighting three key aspects around the dialogue. One would be the respect and the trust to their perceptions, the flexibility and the inclusion of the different viewpoints, and some supportive relations in terms of not just going, consulting, perhaps constructing a water service, a water infrastructure and leaving. So more of a continuous dialogue and supportive relationship between the stakeholders. So just to conclude, a few ideas on what would it take to have to produce or to implement meaningful participatory process with indigenous people. We have certainly to recognize and involve the autochthonous authorities. Of course, the use of suitable language, but not only the language, the type of communication, the recognition and integration of other values and world views, including as well, of course, the local knowledge around the environment and the ecological systems. When it comes to projects that affect the water resources, the land use, etc., the implementation of the free and informed prior consent, which could be subject to one or more of these seminars, and and all this has to happen also in spaces for dialogues that are culturally sensitive and appropriate to include different stakeholders, particularly when we talk about indigenous peoples. Flexibility, I have mentioned that a couple of times because it is crucial, and the permanent mechanisms for dialogue and technical support between the indigenous peoples and the authorities. And with this, and not willing to take more of the time that has been allocated, I thank you, and I'm looking forward to the other presentation and your questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. I really appreciated that. And I think that you hit on an issue that a lot of people maybe don't think about necessarily around water and equality, which is that of precipitation. So I think that by hitting on that, you really brought us not just to the idea of is the access to water just in the amounts, you know, or with the cost, but here participation, the ability to control and to be part of the decision-making process. I think that's really important thing to think about today, on World Water Day, and thinking about leaving no one behind. So we're going to go on to our next speaker, Amanda Lofton. And let me send that to you. And make sure you take yourself off mute there. You just want to make sure you don't mute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So I need to go back to the screen and start again. Okay. Thank you for introducing me, Scott. First of all, I just wanted to say a few words about who we are, because it's quite important to recognise that Waterlex it's an NGO that's working specifically on water and sanitation, and our vision is a world with sustainable use and access. And then our mission is to secure this using the human rights to water and sanitation and law and policy reform. So that's our main mission, and we try and be the best we can in that. Yeah. As an introduction to leaving no one behind, we know that there are a lot of global risks and that the world is facing a lot of stress, huge water scarcity, problems with food, water, energy, impacts of climate change, and of course that there are profound effects on the most vulnerable people amongst us. Reality is that more than 2 billion people, are without access to safe, clean water at home. But how do we know? And of course, 4.5 billion people have no toilets. but we don't know who those people are a lot of the time, and we need to know who they are to be able to help them. The inadequate water and sanitation have profound effects on health, development, poverty. They're all interconnected, causes and effects. And the effects of inadequate water and sanitation on human health are huge, with close to half of all people in developing countries suffering from severe health problems caused by poor water and sanitation. The reasons for inadequate access are related to social, economic, sustainability, and political reasons. And there's no solution that's going to solve every problem. We need to have a look holistically at the current situation and see what are the causes of the problem, and see if what we can work around. But it's usually a mix of all of the above, with a fragile political state having another layer of complications on top of everything else. I just want to introduce you a little bit to the right to water, and I'm sure many of you already know a lot of this, so I'm not going to read it out verbatim. But since January 2003, the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights linked the right to water and an adequate standard of living. And that defined the human right to water. It was then recognized by the UN at General Assembly in 2010. The right to water is absolutely linked to all the other international human rights. It sits right in the middle, and it's a basic human need. But if you don't have access to water, you also are limiting your access to health, food and housing, healthy environment, and ultimately dignity as well. So there are a few extracts here out of the covenant which give you a little bit of a feel of what context they were thinking of when they developed the human rights. Our first step is to include the human rights to water and sanitation in the Constitution. And there really are only a handful of countries around the world, these being a few examples, that have already taken that step. And at least it doesn't solve the problem, but it's the first step towards integrating those human rights into law and policy. And that gives us the first point of call. There are two aspects to the human rights to water and sanitation. There's the normative content and the procedural guarantees. Alejandro very nicely summarized a lot of the procedural guarantees which are common to all the human rights. But within the normative content, there are some guidelines that can be used to help as a methodology for realizing what people actually do need. First one is accessibility, and this really looks at how much access people have and who has that access. It needs to be in the immediate vicinity, not a 6-kilometer walk, which is the average that African and Asian women are often limited to. And it needs to be within 1,000 meters of the home and less than 30 minutes, including queuing up for water supplies. Then we have affordability, and there's a lot of controversy about whether water should be free or not, but actually it needs to be affordable for everybody. And if there are people that can't afford to purchase the water, they should be having it free. But actually there are people who can afford to pay for it too. So there's a pragmatic point of view here which should be reflected in the tariffs in the country, so that some people can pay and some people who can't afford to are looked after. On the availability, we refer to WHO conformity, where they state between 50 and 100 litres a person per day needed to meet most basic needs. That's for drinking and personal hygiene and general household use. It's really not a lot of water, but it gives a standard for governments to include in their guidelines. Quality is an easy one to measure, but a difficult one to implement. The first step is to monitor what you have. That for water to be safe, it needs to be free from microorganisms and chemical substances and anything that's going to threaten a person's health. You can't always tell that the water is contaminated, and so there needs to be some kind of intervention by government to monitor and measure water quality such that it can be safeguarded. Equally with sanitation. Acceptability is the cultural acceptability of water supply, and it needs to be presented in a way that people find it acceptable. So if they're used to a particular taste, then for example, heavily chlorinated water may not be acceptable to some people, and they're not going to drink it. So it's trying to find solutions that suit the individuals, and that is something that needs to be included in the policy design. On the procedural guarantees, I'm going to run through these briefly because Alejandro's covered quite a bit of it, but the key things here are non-discrimination, making sure people have access to information, there's full and transparent public participation, and as Alejandro said, it needs to be safe, and people need to feel like they are wanted to be included. And then there's the accountability of the duty bearers and the monitoring and standards, and sustainability is key to make sure that it's there for future generations. So I have some slides on this, but I think that it's enough for you to briefly look through these. We have on the case of information, it's quite clear that it needs to be shared in a way that people know how to read it in their own language and in an accessible fashion. Participation, accountability. We do a lot of work with national human rights institutions, and this is generally a group that's set up by the government and available for people to turn to if they feel that their human rights are violated. They are organizations that are often underfunded and don't necessarily understand the full implications of water being a human right. So we do a lot of capacity enhancement, but also introducing them to people working in the water sector so that they know that they have somebody there who could actually support them and help with the monitoring, with the education, and also has the ear of government potentially for policy reform. And sustainability is really about that link between the environment and water management, and taking a holistic view at where the water comes from and how to conserve it and look after it such that water quality is maintained and there's a water availability for people, but at the same time to look after the source and the environment in a completely holistic way. So what tools are there for realizing human rights to water and sanitation? As I said, there's no silver bullet, there's no one way that's going to work, and it's very contextual. And it varies from one country to another. What we do is legal mapping and gap analysis of the laws and policies in different countries, looking at water laws and where they are including human rights to water and sanitation. What this does is identify areas where there is a need, and then matching it up with what's actually happening in practice to see what solutions can practically be achieved. And quite often these solutions are easily achieved. They're the low-hanging fruit. It's about how do you reallocate your resources, include women in your decision-making processes? How do you make sure that you've thought about disabled access, and have you made access safe for all people and young people and so on? So it really is, it's just a different way of thinking about what you already have so that you enable more access for people that currently maybe are being overlooked. Also, we're developing tools to map vulnerable people by extending that methodology and looking at who they are and where they are, how they can be identified, and what can we do to recognize them. So this is a new tool that we're working on with UNHCR, and it hopefully will be a valuable additional methodology that people can use for that. Ultimately, we're looking for progressive realization. There isn't, as far as governments go, they don't have to supply water and sanitation to everybody overnight. And this is the progressive realization. However, they do need to make sure that the basic minimum needs for drinking water are met. And it's the best way of doing that quickly is through a human rights-based approach. There aren't enough dollars around to build infrastructure and pipeline for everybody in the next 12 months to 5 years. And in the meantime, people are dying from poor health and diarrhea and so on. So we need to be looking at a way of solving that in a progressive way. And I think a human rights-based approach is the best tool for this. We've moved from the MDGs, as Shervin talked about earlier on, to the SDGs, where we want to have safe and affordable water for all. It's a higher level of attainment. We can start by introducing human rights into the Constitution, and those laws can be rolled out into the country. But in actual fact, to enact good change, we need to incorporate a human rights-based approach to that human rights to water and sanitation. And the key aspects here are accountability and participation, which really means a change in approach and a change in thinking about how we go about doing that. And the ultimate goal is, of course, to have human rights fully embraced in the laws, policies, and strategies. So, in conclusion, countries must take immediate steps to safeguard people's human rights to water and, of course, other human rights, and that priority should be given to economic, social, and cultural rights, and there needs to be continual progress. And that is the commitment that governments should be making. Thank you. I appreciate the time. If you have any questions, please ask me.
Well, thank you so much for that great presentation. I think we all learned a lot, and it gave us both a, this is a topic that just cries out for the human right to water. So I'm really glad that we were able to kind of cover an overview of the human right to water, and then also where you're driving it, which directions you're going, where you see opportunity to work at the national level, and where you see things that need to be connected at the international level as well. Just as I think you made a good point at the end, said questions. So just remind anybody in the audience that if you have questions, we'll have a question time at the end of all the presentations. And you can ask those questions by going on your GoToWebinar control panel. About halfway down, it says questions. If you just open that up and type your question in, it'll come right to me. I'll see it, and I'll be able to direct it at the end to the most appropriate person. I'd also like to remind everybody that we are running just a little bit over time right now, so it'd be good if you can just keep your presentation just as close to 10 minutes as possible. We're going now to Alexander Ott. Let me just get your presentation ready.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That was already an extremely interesting and comprehensive overview of so many things that actually.
If you can just scoot a little bit closer to the microphone, that would be good. Or speak really loudly.
And extremely comprehensive overview already of what the World Water Development Report that we have been to is actually talking about, and I know that there are several contributors, either directly or through the literature, among the fellows who have been just speaking.
Speak up nice and strong there, if you could. It's a little tricky hearing you.
Is that still good?
That's getting better. That's close.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, really just
getting better. Okay, good. Okay. Yes, well, we have just launched the United Nations World Water Development Report on the very subject of leaving no one behind, as has also already been mentioned. Of course, it's a celebration that we are doing today, and we would, in fact, concentrate here in this presentation on one chapter of the report. In fact, the chapter is the one on the social dimensions of leaving no one behind. And it's perhaps worthwhile to just give a quick introduction on how this what this chapter is striving actually to address, because from Mara and also from Alejandro in particular, and I'm very grateful because it just sounds, I hope I will just be able to chime in what has already been said, because the transversal role of water that they have already been describing in society is in fact one of the key issues of the difficulty of achieving today. We have identified among the groups that are most affected, indeed, over the past years, and it has been stated several times, indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, refugees, migrants, in many cases, and worldwide women, but also youth, the poor, often combined categories actually, and the rural population. And one of the things that also has been just said by Amanda and before regarding indigenous peoples is that we are to a certain extent facing a vicious circle. The vicious circle is that the groups concerned most by the lack of the implementation of the human rights are actually, in many cases, also lacking information about it. And for instance, the question of language barriers, educational barriers, cultural barriers, but also geographical isolation. And when many groups are excluded from social progress, and the position is weak, then in fact they will have already a lower voice, a less heard voice in the policy processes, and little political leverage to change and influence the policy and the legislation. Of course, in turn, that makes them also more vulnerable when it comes to facing direct or indirect discrimination. And just to give a quick hint at how discrimination and the lack of implementation can perhaps be displayed in a graphic manner, we have through either intentional or unintentional social phenomena, basically, or political systems, barriers to universalism of the implementation of human rights. You see it here in this graphic, the intolerance and exclusion, of course, the weak bargaining power I just mentioned. Well, self-identities, where Alejandro was hinting at flexibilities, but those concern not only the discriminated groups, but also the societies, obviously, that are potentially surrounding them. And you have, of course, also inequalities, economic inequalities. I mentioned indeed add there, besides the ethnical discrimination, also the discrimination against people with disabilities and elderly people who often suffer particular hardship. You have a short list that had been established a couple of years ago on identified drivers or mechanisms of discrimination, where you can see especially also what can counteract those mechanisms is substantive equality established in legislation and policies. Indeed, the active participation, empowering people to participate, and that goes together with providing services very often, because so you will see in a minute, in fact, the capacity of bargaining and of integrating social mechanisms to change a situation often goes actually with education and the access to services in the first place. So there is also another vicious circle that needs to be broken. And of course, all this would need to be monitored, and access to justice needs to be guaranteed. If you look at inequalities, I'm not going into detail on the statistics, but you can see that, and we all know already, that we do have huge disparities in income and available resources. They also tend to feed into extreme poverty and the increase of difficulties to then access the service. Yes, I think the education system or just simply access system, for instance, the access to water and sanitation in the school system. I'm not going much into children, scholarity, and the chances they have to access a school with water and sanitation facilities, and especially also with gender-specific, sex-specific sanitation facilities, which explains then a reproduction to a certain extent of inequalities when they leave school. In order to improve those services, obviously not only in schools but also worldwide, we would need to require to meet the targets that also Amanda has been mentioning, safely manage water and sanitation services. We would need to basically triple the currently estimated funding. A quick overview of where we have the current highest disparities between what is being invested and what should be invested in terms of the infrastructures and other measures. To come to basically the solutions that we can see and that we have been starting to implement community. We have developed, for instance, for the people who have been sustainable sanitation programs, for them to work and not only be a primer and then to die out as a short-term project. You will need to ensure that those networks of support are actually sustained and sustainable, because this is something that should be reached not for the short term. It's something that should be reached, obviously, and maintained for basically ever, for the existence of a society while improving the situation. Another point, I'm going to skip this one and go straight to Next. In order to support the human rights approach, from the system natural soul and their long-standing adapting to the circumstances they live in the natural environment. And we have some examples in the report, notably also, on how those systems have been achieving either improvements to already existing situations or simply have been sustained over a very long period. That's the case, a very long period, since as for the case of Peru, the example of the water judges, where you have a self-organized legal system that works for improved distribution of water among the people. You have also the possibility, and this is the very first example mentioned here, where you can rediscover ancestral knowledge and put it to use in order to improve the water yield of a given, in this case, small water basin, small runoff basin, that will improve then ultimately also the access of water of city dwellers in the part of the microbasin. I'd like to conclude with the importance that stressing that really the educational part cannot be underestimated when it comes to empowering people to follow the course that has also been suggested by the other speakers before. In order to put in place decentralized systems to empower the communities to maintain those and to claim also their right to manage their own water and sanitation systems, at the same time obtain the help for those systems and the legal frameworks. For all this, you require education, and ideally you require education also in the languages that sustain those communities, and you would need to continue training not only the persons directly who are concerned, but also basically those policymakers, decision makers that are carrying the institutions that can enable this type of education. I'm leaving with this. Sorry for the overtime. Thank you very much.
Thank you for such an informative and interesting presentation. I thought that was really helpful and really gave us kind of an overview and hit a lot of different issues that people might not be, especially with issues like disability, that people might not necessarily think about all the time. As we were getting closer towards the end of the session, let's go ahead and get to Lisha as quickly as we can. And that way we can get to questions. Did you get it there? You're gonna have to take yourself off mute there, I think.
I know, but I'm just trying to get full screen. Can you see full screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Like now?
Yep, looks perfect. Oh, that looks really good.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. My name is Lesha. I'm a steering committee member of the Women for Water Partnership, which is a global organization of women's organizations that work on water and sanitation issues. And the actual activity could differ very much depending on where they are and what their priorities are. But you could say we basically cover the whole hydrological cycle. I called my presentation Promises, Promises. And one of the reasons is that there is a whole list of promises and policies and treaties that actually say that women play a central role to water management, water provision, water use. But in actual fact, from 1992 towards today, the impact on the ground is still very debatable. So one of the things that would really help is to actually hold governments accountable to what they promised. Yes, lots of promises, but not enough action on the ground. And I do like the slogan of this year and of the whole Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind. But actually, it's a bit funny, because leaving no one behind puts the action with other people to help people. And what you really want to do is make it more powerful, enable those that have not enough voice to act on their own behalf. And that's slightly different than saying, I'm not going to leave anybody behind. When it comes to women, women are actors. And yes, of course, women like to get a little help from a friend, but they don't want you to take over. They want to be able to do their own thing. And secondly, women as such is a very diverse group. There are people who are highly educated, able to act on their own. There are women who are very much into the poverty dip and need a lot of help. So one measure doesn't fit all, but they all need to be heard. So what we would actually like to see is that women's empowerment and water are intrinsically linked. So that SDG 5 and 6 and other water-related targets together in implementation is a necessity when you go to programming, to project development, to any measure you want to take. The World Water Development Report had a few interesting remarks, and I would like to stress one, complementing what Amanda was saying. She stressed a lot, and rightly so, the human rights to water and sanitation. Basically, that's an individual right, and it's not subject to a state's approval. It's universal and cannot be withdrawn. Now, the problem is that the other half of the equation is water rights. So, are you actually entitled to use water, withdraw water for domestic use, irrigation, for managing your water resources? And that's another part of the problem, that in a lot of cases, these water rights are completely linked to land rights. And land rights, as we all know, is a huge problem in the world. So what's needed? Well, one is to advocate for land and water rights for women. And this has been on the political agenda for a long time, but still in a lot of countries still a problem, either by law or by tradition. But not having access and ownership of land also means that you have less access to water. The second important part is that women are actors to support, so give them a vote. Position them as leaders, experts, and make sure that they can act on equal footing. Now, within the IWRA context, one of the things that could really help is a multidisciplinary research approach. Because we know the narratives, we strongly believe that it's important to have this gender balance, but there's not that much research that's actually looked into this. So Women for Water and OECD started a project to actually do that and look into what happens if you bring in more women in the decision-making theater, what happens to governance, and we would love to have more support from everybody who's listening in to get us the right stories. As was mentioned before as well, I believe by our Korean friends, you need to apply all the 3 sustainable development principles. Technology is one, but the social and economic impacts inputs are just as crucial. Another one also has to do with, I would say, some of our academic colleagues here. We need more sex-designated data collection and analysis, and then both qualitative and quantitative. And one of the things that we could promote is actually make sure that we get more citizen science and data collection involved. Of course, yes, it's going to be difficult to validate, but if you get 1 million data out of somewhere and it shows a trend, then it does mean that you have to do something about it and maybe investigate further. So making the push for more citizens' data collection and analysis is extremely important, both for women, but also from all the other groups that were mentioned before. And to follow up on what Alejandro and Alexander were saying, it's extremely important to acknowledge and enhance traditional and indigenous knowledge and experience. There, women play a really big role, also in terms of historical knowledge, and it's crucial to document that, use it, and see how we can comply that with modern science. So make a new combination to enhance what we're doing. Alexander was also talking about education. So what is extremely important here is that as when it comes to the current situation, only 17% of the paid jobs in the water sector are filled by women. And we really don't even know at what level. So the 17% could easily be support and administrative jobs. If we want a balance in ways of thinking, in participation, but also make sure that the huge gap we have in terms of capacity to fulfill the SDGs is going to be filled, we need more women educated and getting jobs in the sector. So one thing that might help, great project from UNESCO, by the way, is to certify earlier acquired competences and experiences. So people don't have to start all the way over from zero, but we actually acknowledge what they do already know and make them aware of what they know, because a lot of times this is in their routine and they're not even aware that they know this, and give them a certification. So by that, they get acknowledged and they can get jobs. We need to train moderators to make sure that women's voices are heard and their suggestions incorporated. Lots of times they may be in the room, but that doesn't mean they're heard or their interventions acknowledged. We need to change the working conditions and the HR policies, also to make it possible that more women get involved into the water sector. And I love to discuss all of these ideas more with all of you, and make sure that regardless where the women are and what they are, whether they're indigenous, white, another color, that they can have their voices heard and play a big role in our water management. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I thought that was really good and really kind of found ways to address women's role in so many different parts of water governance and this kind of debate and conversation around how to expand access. I thought that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. What we're going to do now is shift to the questions period for the last little bit of time that we have left. I'd remind everyone that the questions section is, you just type your question, it'll come to me. About halfway down on your GoToWebinar control panel, you just type the question, you'll see the spot says questions, open it up, type it, it'll come to me. I can also remind people that the copies of the presentation and a recording of the webinar will be available on our website, www.iwra.org, at the end of, in a couple days. So we'll have it there as soon as possible. And the first question is if any of our speakers could address the role of corruption in water access, and particularly the ways that corruption impacts those who have been left behind. I'll just let anyone sort of jump in on that question and speak if they can, if they have some.
Yeah, Scott, I'm happy to jump in.
Please do.
Me too,
Somebody,
after Leslie.
okay, Alejandro. Because then I'll start with saying that one of the great cooperations that's around is between SIWI and some of the women's organizations in Africa and Women for Water to actually look into this topic. And to make it even worse, what we're going to look into is sextortion. So women who actually have to exchange sexual favors for access to water, which is, I mean, it's unbelievable, but it does happen a lot, unfortunately. Yes, it's definitely true that there is corruption in the water sector, like in any sector that has big infrastructure, a big public impact. And I would love to see that we do more on it. It was Maria Mutegambe, like 10 years ago, who first put it on the agenda. She was the former Minister of Water of Uganda. And then she was told she was off the chart, that she was crazy, that it wasn't happening. And we really know that it is happening. And I'm happy to hand over to you, Alejandro, to continue on this chain of thought.
Thank you, Lesha. Indeed, that is something that we have been working on for a long time in terms of trying to address corruption through an integrity approach that looks at the preventive measures of for making corruption difficult, as well as the values that have to underpin the behavior of people not to be corrupt, right? But yeah, one very specific aspect of that is what Lisha was mentioning, the sextortion. That we released a report last year and about cases that coming with the cases for a couple of cities, but certainly it's a big hidden problem that we want to address more, looking now into how to make more interventions here and also work with governments and utilities to prevent these practices. So that is a terrible example of how corruption not only affects people directly, but is a complete divert of how resources and behavior should be going. And that is the critical aspect of corruption, that it really diverts what should be happening. And that, of course, the more vulnerable people and groups are then the most affected. So certainly it's I'm looking forward to have a World Water Day on let's end corruption.
That's a great idea to me, Alejandro. Maybe 2023.
Let's fight for it together.
That sounds good. I agree with this too. That sounds good. If anyone else has questions, please just type them in and let's get them answered by our panel. If anyone has anything they'd like to see addressed, one of the questions that I'd like to see if anyone could talk about maybe is how we can link some of these rights. We've talked about different things, right to land. I've heard people talk about right to sanitation, which can be linked to water. How can different linked rights be addressed to create synergies around the theme of this year, leaving no one behind? You have to take yourself off mute there. Amanda, you gotta take yourself off mute.
I know, it's easier said than done. Can you hear me? So, yeah, first of all, there are a number of human rights. They're interconnected and linked, but they're all equally important. So you can't just concentrate on one. But when you're working on, when you're experts in one area, like we are with human rights to water and sanitation, inevitably you are supporting the human rights to health, to a healthy environment, to food, looking after gender rights. That you can't fix the problem on water without looking at all of the other human rights practically. And so I don't think it's a problem. It's an opportunity actually, when you're looking at the human right to water, to use it as a way of helping with some of the other challenges that are facing marginalized people.
Scott, can I give some other type of reaction?
Please do.
One of the big problems we have in the water sector is that we're still so divided. We have wash specialists and water resource specialists and wastewater treatment specialists, etc., etc. But of course, when you want to combine all the issues in terms of rights and implementation, one of the things you need to do is to combine that. So I think one of the things that we really need is a global governance system to make sure that all these different angles and different opinions get discussed together, and that there is a synergy between all these developments. And there is a lot of effort being put into trying to persuade the United Nations to have a intergovernmental global governance system. And I sincerely hope that the first global conference that's going to take place, which is now decided in 2021, will help to go in that direction. But I also think that everybody, from whatever angle you come, whether it's legal or environmental or hydrology or it doesn't matter, has to stress that if we don't combine these different insights and issues into one forum to discuss them, we'll never go anywhere, because we'll keep pushing each other back, saying, oh, I don't agree with you because my angle is different. That's deadly.
I actually, well, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I don't think you can solve water problems without looking holistically. And I'm actually looking forward to the topic next year on climate change, because we're going to continue to work on leaving no one behind in the context of climate change. And to me, that connects the environmental issues with the people issues when you look at those two together. And water already connects with health, with food, with many of the other human rights. And climate change sometimes gets isolated as being an environmental issue, and not everybody is supportive because they're probably too poor or too busy to actually worry about climate when they actually don't have food on the table or drinking water. But if you can combine the efforts on the water management, so that you're actually looking at climate resilience, so that it's obvious that what you're doing is helping to provide more water or better quality water for those people, then you can start to connect them. But I think all of these nexus issues are nexus issues rather than necessarily solutions. But I actually see that there could be a help to solve some of the climate issues by bringing in the people and the human rights to water and sanitation as a way of helping people to recognize that there is a reason for doing this, so that it's all interconnected.
If I may,
Go ahead.
I'd really like to second Amanda here, because I think through the human rights we do have the tool to pull this all together, because the human right to water and sanitation resembles to some extent certainly not to a silver bullet, but it is such a hands-on, or it is affecting such a hands-on aspect of everyday life that it's very complicated to deny it, say, unseen. And at the same time, of course, you need, contrary to other rights, to implement it in a very practical manner. And that puts together very many actors. Of course, well, at the intergovernmental sphere, basically, you find yourself always having to deal with other priorities. But we can see that at least when it comes to international actors, they, I think, are pulling things together more and more. And this report, and also perhaps even this webinar, is a certain example for that. I mean, this was fairly interdisciplinary, I would say. And the analysis of the problem, I think, is already pretty cross-cutting. It's the implementation or the implementers that need to accept indeed to go more intersectoral. Well, we are going to organize a conference in May here at UNESCO on this particular subject because we notice this already here I'm mentioning education for sustainable development, which basically would need to include a very cross-cutting approach in order to reach, to capacitate people, to empower people everywhere, not only to claim their rights, but also to be able to assume their own responsibilities in reaching a situation that is better than the current. I think the role of water across the SDGs is basically the image that comes to my mind. I mean, you cannot implement any of the SDGs without water, and I think the international community is centering more and more on this issue at all levels.
Thank you. That's a good point. I think. Thank you, Alexander. I think we have time for one last question, if everyone will indulge just going a little over time here. And the last question comes from Madahar and he asks why there's so much focus on drinking water when we're talking about access to water and we're talking about rights to water. And how can we expand our focus to include other uses of water? Particularly around agricultural, but there's many uses of water. So how can we sort of broaden the language of our debate to include these other water uses when we're thinking about questions like food? Please just jump in, just unmute yourself and go right
on. We certainly don't limit it to drinking water. We're looking at water for all personal uses when we're looking at the human rights to water. Clearly drinking water is the most important one, because without it you can't survive. But actually the environmental issues, as I tried to say earlier, they're connected with the right to drinking water and water for personal needs, because you can't have one without the other. And so in order to solve the problem, you need to have a look at the water, the resource, look at where the water is coming from, and are you conserving it and looking after it in order to enable people and future generations to have access to drinking water. But the primary thing when we're looking at, I suppose our vision is for people to have access to clean and safe drinking water. To get there, we also need to look after the environment.
Can I follow up on what Amanda said? One of the things I tried to show in one of my slides was the two aspects. One is the human right to water and sanitation, and the other one is water rights. So that women actually have access to water for their businesses, for agriculture, for any use that we need. And those are, of course, totally interlinked, but also in a lot of cases require different legislation. So one of them is the right to tenure and ownership of land, which gives access to water. Another one is that globally 70% of the workers in agriculture are women. 70% of our water is used for agriculture. So basically women control 50% of our water supply in the world. So to enable them to do that in a good way and actually have control over how irrigation takes place, how water is supplied to businesses, not just the big ones, but also the smaller entities, is absolutely crucial. And for me, the two go together. So you need to look at control over water resources. You need to look at control over land rights. You need to look at the human rights of water and sanitation. And that's why it's so important to get all these different groups together and make sure that this is one big plea for making sure all these rights are kept.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
If I could just come back on that with regards to water tenure, it's something that we are working on. The land tenure guidelines were worked on a few years ago, and water tenure was considered too difficult at that time. Water tenure is now in a slightly different place. We have a lot more conventions and treaties which are being ratified around transboundary agreements, and it's time, I think, to give guidelines on how water tenure is regarded, including the human rights to water and sanitation in that process, considering giving guidelines effectively to different states on how they should be thinking about their water rights, not just land rights. And I think that we need to be careful to separate the human right to water and water rights, which are very different things. Water rights are a legal it's a legal document that you can own the rights to extract water from a river. The human right to water is a right that every person has and should have, and the state has a duty to make sure that they do. So that is very different from the legal status. But the two, I agree with Leisha, there needs to be a more holistic view, and the time has come where I think there needs to be more guidelines on water tenure.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think we're a few minutes over, so we're going to go ahead and finish off the webinar. I know I had a really great time, and I hope that everyone else also learned a lot. And I really want to spend some time thanking my panel. I really appreciate everyone for taking the time to show up today and prepare your slides and take time out of your busy days to speak with me and speak with all of our audience members. So thank you very much, Shrivin Hashimi, Alejandro Jimenez, Amanda Lofton, Alexander Ott, Leisha Whitmer. Thank you so much, everybody. I know that some of the panel and IWRA are all on Twitter, so if you want to look them up on Twitter and follow them along, Amanda is definitely on Twitter. So follow her, tweet, like her tweets, and go ahead and engage with us that way. And again, if these presentations left you interested in learning more and discussing more, go ahead and follow us on the IWRA LinkedIn webpage. So we'll be able to continue the discussions there as well. And as a reminder, we're going to have the recording of this webinar will be available on our website with the slides from our presenters. So if you want to review them again and watch again and again, as many times as you like, then it'll be available for you. I really do hope, though, that everyone found some insights from this World Water Day. Really were able to take some ideas away from this special event, and it gave me a lot of material to think about as I continue to do some writing and how I'm going to be applying this to what I'm working on. So I hope that this also inspires you in your work as well. Just to remind everybody listening that the webinar is brought to you today by the International Water Resources Association. We are an over 40-year-old nonprofit, non-governmental educational organization, and we focus on bridging disciplines and geographies and connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, and institutions who are concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resource. So if you're interested in knowing more about our association or becoming a member, go to www.IWRA.org. You can also check out our flagship publication, Water International. Many of you who are at academic institutions probably have free access, but we also have a number of the articles are available by open access to anyone. So you can go and look at Water International up, and you'll find, or if you're of the academic publishing type, go ahead and submit an article. I know that our editor would love to read it. So we have many different resources, ways to connect with us, and please go ahead and reach out and do that. So on behalf of the whole IWRA office, thank you so much for tuning in and watching this webinar. Have a great World Water Day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.